the Rangers Journal now.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Rangers Journal this Tuesday evening. My name is Doug, and I'll be your host this evening, along with some wonderful panelists, as always, to talk about the famous. We have got a sort of a slightly, not more interesting, that's not fair, a slightly unique topic, I think, tonight. We're going to be talking about the loan system, loan players, and how Rangers have utilised that system over the years, We're going to kind of look over the past decade, maybe touch on some older here and there. But just sort of talk about the loan system, how we think we've gotten on with it, and where we could potentially improve. Joining me this evening, I do have a panel of three. One is going to be joining us in momentarily. He's just finishing off his tea. Important to stay fueled for these conversations. But first and foremost, I've got Ross. How are you doing this evening, Ross?
I'm very well, Doug. Thanks. Been enjoying the 37-degree heat here in Athens, so obviously had the factor 50 on, trying to stay hot. Stay out the sun, as Billy will attest to. Sun and bald heads do not go well.
Indeed, make sure you're keeping yourself covered up in the appropriate sunblock. And joining us also just below me, we've got Billy. How are you doing this evening?
Yeah, good. The other half of the Rangers Mitchell brothers here. Good to be on. Always good to talk about Rangers, especially building up to a big Euro night. We're all getting the battle fever on. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Absolutely, and we will be joined by the one and only Mitch. As I say, very shortly he'll be coming on. So welcome to Mitch when he arrives. Welcome to everyone in the chat. Seeing a lot of usual names there. Isaac. Got John in there, Phil, hello to Phil, Bald Russell Martin, continuing the theme, evening to yourself. So thanks, guys, for joining us as well. Also got the Ibrox channel podcast in there. So thanks for joining us. Any questions, comments, or anything as we're going along, do throw them in the chat. I will be keeping an eye open for it. So, loan deals. Loans have been a part of football since pretty much the dawn of the game. Back in the amateur days, teams would turn up, and just like in millions of playgrounds and across the land, if one team didn't have enough players to play, they would borrow players from the other side to ensure they had their full 11. The practice of loaning players was used primarily for sort of major games like cup finals and things, and was kind of frowned upon in the early days, and did then start to become more complicated when contracts became a thing, and players were obviously contracted to their own teams, which only furthered the kind of black mark of loans as they happened. Loans were referred to as objectionable and unfair proceedings. That created unhealthy competition and increased the evils of professionalism when they were viewed in the early days. Once the FA had formed and multiple leagues were in play, they did start to see more and more of loans occurring, particularly again for these big games, and also for things like relegation ties, where teams would bring in, as I say, ringers to help them from the dreaded drop. This led to loans eventually being banned in 1898, and they didn't return until World War II, when obviously teams struggled for players due to folks away to war. And so the guest player system sort of came in to help with that. Finally, though, in 1966, the FA brought loans back into the game, allowing 2 loan transfers per team per season without transfer fees. You couldn't have a fee included with your loan as you can today. Loans had to last a minimum of 3 months, and they could only be between teams within different divisions. So you couldn't loan, we couldn't loan a player out to Hearts as they played in the same division as us, for example. And this sort of set the stall for what would become the modern loan system today. There were rule changes over the years, obviously, as some of those rules are no longer in place with the 1995 Bosman ruling, which affected sort of all transfers. And it wasn't until 2003, I didn't realize it was actually, I say quite as recent. 2003 isn't necessarily recent, but in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't until 2003 that the restriction on loans between clubs was lifted in terms of being between different divisions. So from 2003, you could loan between teams in the same division. So that's a sort of a brief history on the loan system for you, if you like. As I say, we've obviously used loans throughout the time. We're going to look at today some of our maybe more successful ones and kind of recent and slightly further past. We've obviously had players like Jermaine Defoe came in, Stephen Davis, who came in both originally on loan and when he returned. Vladimir Weiss, a bit of a cult loan player, came in 2011 with his famous assist for that League Cup final goal for Nikita Jelavic. And that sort of encased him into Rangers folklore. And then maybe less fancied players like Gregory Vignal, former left back, came in on loan for 04-05 from Liverpool. He fired the penalty against Maritimo that put us into the UEFA Cup that year, and also scored in the 2-0 victory against Celtic in February 2005, scoring the opening goal for that. He won a League and Cup double and did want to sign for the club, but unfortunately we weren't able to strike a deal to get him to stay. Start off with yourself, Ross. We're going to sort of start right at the top end of things with this season. So at the moment, we currently have 2 loans in the squad, and we're seemingly on the verge of a third with Giga, Max Aarons, and then as it looks like we're about to bring in Mikey Moore on loan. What are your thoughts on the sort of the current players that we've got in the door through the loan system right now?
I think the loan system over the last few years for us has been obviously a market that we've managed to get players from rather successfully, but what it has given us is a bit of a two-edged sword in terms of that it's given us extremely talented footballers, but when it's came down to the nitty-gritty, it's given us players that when we want to keep them, unfortunately we can't afford them. We've obviously seen that with Malik Tillman, who came in under Gio and was, very raw, and a lot of people maybe perhaps didn't fully appreciate the talent that he possessed and the potential that he could have brought to a team. He's obviously now moved to Bayer Leverkusen for, I believe it's around about 40 million euros. With the constant question of, do we get money from it? No, we haven't got any money from it. I'll just like to categorise that. And then obviously we received Abdallah Sima, who obviously played in a very, mismatched team under Michael Beale and then under Philippe Clement for a little while. They came to the end that we couldn't afford them. I think there was probably a little bit of being unable to reach the Champions League that caused us to be unable to purchase him, in the long term. And then last year, obviously, probably one of the standout players other than Nicholas Raskin was Vasa Cherny. He was sensational. I think it was, over 20 goal contributions, but it's a player that whether Russell Martin likes him or not, I don't think we could probably afford to be committing, £7 or £8 million off our transfer budget in a season where we need a full rebuild on a player like that, despite how good he is and how good, the talent he has and what he brings to the team. So it's been a bit of a mixed bag for us. But again, within that, you go back a few years prior, you mentioned, Stephen Davis, his second spell, Jermaine Defoe, Ryan Kent, when he arrived, he was really exciting. He looked like a player we needed. You can debate about, the end of his career, but when he arrived and when we purchased him, that was a really, really exciting signing for us. So it's been a little bit of a mixed bag, to say the least.
Absolutely. And if I come to yourself, Billy, as I said, we've got 2 players currently. Looks like we'll have 3. And all 3 are players that are likely to be first team or first 11s picks in the team if they perform, as obviously we hope that they will. Is that a good number, do you think? Do you have any objections to having multiple loan players in a squad, or do you think it just depends on the context at the time, or are you more of a we should only have 1 or 2 kind of in the first team kind of guy?
Well, I know that my answer is just delaying the real hot topic of the night, which is what Mitch was having. Was it turkey twizzlers? Was it something else? That's lit up the chat. On the
fish cakes and rice, mate.
Fish cakes and rice. It was. I think somebody may have. It was you that said that, right? I thought someone had guessed that. I thought maybe it's one of your regulars. On the loan side of things, it's one of those things that we don't really have any choice now in the modern world. Where the Scottish League sits relative to England and Europe, I think we're always going to be in a position now where you get 2 types of loans. You get loans from higher leagues where we are going to try and polish up players and then probably have no chance of buying them. or loans from lower leagues where either we're having a look at someone or we're being creatively, we're doing a creative accounting where we bring someone in who we think, right, we want them, but maybe we don't splash the cash this summer and we put it into next year's figures. I think the figure of 3 in the first team sounds okay. To be honest, I wouldn't be massively keen on going beyond that because a lot, I'm not questioning the professionalism of any of the guys that are coming in because you get various experiences with the loan deals. But I think at 3, you've got guys there who in Aaron's, once he's hopefully at right back, Giga, who I thought started off great in the Panathinaikos game and then weirdly seemed to get a wee bit sort of creaky as he went along. And if Mikey Moore's as good as everyone seems to think he is and gets regular first team football, 3 in a first team to me seems plenty because you do also want the sort of synergy you get from people who are actually invested, people who want to build their career and do something at Rangers. And I'm not saying the other guys don't, but I think there is a danger, and I think maybe we've suspected in the past once or twice that the balance hasn't quite been right. And I think there is a danger, especially when you get to tough situations in the hard end of the season where guys that are going to be moving back to their parent club or maybe haven't enjoyed their time at Rangers. I always worry that once you get past the midway point in the season, these are the guys that might start worrying about injuries or looking at the next move or whatever. So I think 2 or 3 in a starting 11 seems okay. I mean, there's no science to it, but that seems like an okay figure. Ideally, you'd want all 11 to be our players and either making careers here or adding to their value. But I think realistically, modern world, you're going to have 2 or 3 loan players, and as long as they're good quality, which let's be honest, with Arns and Giga, they look like they don't look like projects. They look like they're going to come in and do a job for a year. And Mikey Moore, that'll be interesting because he's a bit younger, but Spurs really like him. And when you see he's England under 19 and 21 stats, you can see why. So 2 or 3 I can live with. More than that, I would start to worry about the balance of the team, to be honest.
Oh, that's fair. Mitch, I'm going to bring a point to yourself. I was watching one of our, or listening to in the background, I should say, one of our fellow Rangers pods earlier this morning, and a massive point that was going through the chat and that one was this point brought up here by Dado, where he's saying, what's the point in taking on a 17-year-old on a loan deal? A lot of people sort of brought up this point that, about Moore's age. In particular, people were talking about the subject, and the reason I'm bringing this to you, subject true to your heart, is that it's blocking our own youth players from coming through, or that all we're doing is developing another team's youth player rather than focusing on our own. What's kind of your thoughts as the champion of the young, as it were? What's your kind of thoughts on that idea, and do you think that signing players of that kind of age is a good thing?
I think
loaning players, I should say, of that kind of age.
There's a two-type answer I could give to that. One's the political answer, and one's the answer I want to give. So we know which path we're off down. We're off down the latter. I think when it comes to young players like Mikey Moore he's very much been earmarked as a special talent for tomorrow. And I think we have proven success with players like Ahmad in the past, when he was up here from Man United. I think we live in a world where it's perfectly feasible from a physical aspect and a minutes aspect that both him and Finlay Curtis can both be first team players without it hindering either player's development. For a start, Moore can also play on both wings. Curtis, we'd much rather see him out in the left. We know that he's there, but he can also play in the middle as well. So both have different roles that they can play within the team. Would I want to see us making a habit of this? No. But I think for this season, can I accept it? Yes. And I think part of the reason why I can accept it so much as well this season is there is so much work needing done to this that's needed to be done to the squad as opposed to needs done, because that implies there's a load still to do. And I think really we're maybe 3-4 players short once we've got the rest of the outgoings done and a couple more bodies to come in. I think we're probably there or thereabouts as to where we want to be. I don't want to make a habit of it, but for a season I can stomach it. In terms of going to the loan player conversation that was just kicking off there before, I think when you look at the likes of Aaron's, for example, Aaron's is a practical loan for all sides, I think, where at the start of this season he has 2 years left in his Bournemouth contract, and the summer he's down to a year. I think that's one of these loans that makes sense in the try before you buy category. We all know that the likelihood, sorry Doug, please don't get upset when I say it, but Tav's probably not going to stay beyond the summer. So there's a chance to future proof to say, right, well, I'll tell you what, try before you buy, because if we're going to spend £5 or £6 million on him next summer, that is a significant chunk of money, like Ross mentioned. But it's a significant chunk of money to replace a club legend at that point, who's given 10 years service to the club. So we want to make sure quality in versus quality out, stays the same. When it comes to Jigger, I think that's a loan that suits everybody. I really like the big lad. I think he's a big, strapping centre back. Big towering presence as well. Though I like a big, tall, physical centre back. Ross, you try and keep that clean. But I like a big, strong centre back that's commanding at the back, and I think he's got all the raw materials for that. And I'm sure at some stage, if we've got Wolves paying, for argument's sake, 60% of his wages or 70% of his wages, we'd be stupid not to take advantage of it. And in the current climate of where the squad was at the start of this summer, I think that's a deal that is far too sensible. It's a sensible deal that had to be done. To get a shot at a £10 million player for a season, which takes us out a hole this year, I think it helps.
Absolutely. Before we move on to the next point, I want to take just a wee moment here to shout out the YouTube is flagging us to the Sniper, who has now been a member for 7 months. So I just want to give a shout out to the Sniper, and thanks very much for being a member of the channel for so long. Obviously, we see you in the comments regularly, contributing and making great points and just engaging with everyone. So thank you very much to you. If you want to be a member of the channel, you can just go to our YouTube homepage and you can click the membership button to join. But you don't need to do anything like that. We don't expect people to do anything like that. But if you can like and subscribe to the channel, so that would be fantastic. That helps us going along, and just click that little bell icon, which will tell you when we go live for great shows like this. Ross, I'm going to bring you in on a follow-up point that Dado made there after his initial point. If I can find it again, where's it gone? Here we go. He says here, if the lad does well, Spurs will not sell him to Rangers. Fact. Do you think all loans should be players that we're looking to buy, or have a prospect of buying or ability of buying, or is there still value to a player who's going to come in for a season and just contribute to the team for just that season, because we know he'll never be within our price range, or that he's going to go back to a club that wants to have him moving forward and are putting him out specifically to get them developed for their own first teams?
I think there's value to every loan deal, regardless of the circumstances. The problem is that we as a club perhaps reluctantly need to accept our place in the food chain. We obviously, as a club, want to be the biggest in the world, the biggest in Britain, something that we were, 30 years ago. I've recently been reading a lot of stuff about kind of the mid-90s and obviously the glory days and how we were genuinely the biggest club in Britain. So us probably getting a youth player from Spurs 35 years ago, or even 30 years ago, would have been like, why are we taking a player from Spurs? They're nothing. Unfortunately, now we are, we have to be a bit of a feeder club to bigger clubs. We want to look at selling players on. We want to be a club that's attractive for bigger clubs to nurture their talent. That's not to say that every single loan we need to bring in is nurturing talent. You mentioned Amad Diallo, who was a perfect example of a player with all the potential in the world, who had arrived from Italy with a big transfer fee, big expectations, and perhaps up here it didn't work, but I think he's proven that in a dysfunctional Manchester United team, he's been a bit of a star because he's got ability. Mikey Moore is the same. He seems to be the jewel in the crown of the Tottenham Hotspur Academy at the moment. He's very highly rated. He's very highly talented and technical. And unfortunately, he's infinitely better than every footballer we have, probably up to the age of, 22, within that's came through the Rangers Academy. Whether we like to admit it or not, that includes, who we spoke about, Finlay Curtis, Leon King. I can't even think of other players who are currently at Rangers that have been in the academy system. Mikey Moore at 17 is better than all of them. So we as a club need to balance what we want off the field in terms of developing our own youngsters to sell on, but at the same time, we as a club need to win the title. So if we can bring in players that are better, regardless of the circumstances, we have to be open to every option. If Mikey Moore at 17 is the best option we can get ahead of, in terms of the squad building that we have to do, because let's not beat around the bush, Russell Martin has perhaps the biggest squad rebuild we've had in a generation. Genuinely, I mean that. We've spoken about squad rebuilds for years. Michael Beale was given a squad rebuild. Russell Martin needs even more because he's completely lost every player that was a stalwart of the previous, set of players. If you want to talk about the Steven Gerrard team, they're all gone apart from James Tavernier, who obviously like you mentioned, will leave at the end of next season, very, very likely. There's nobody left. The only people that are left are the remnants of the Gio team and the Michael Beale team, who have not been good enough. It's been absolutely diabolical recruitment. So we have to be open to every single kind of option for players that's available to us. And like I say, if Mikey Moore is the best option that we can get as a versatile forward that's not going to cost us an absolute fortune to fill out the squad, then I'm all for it. And I totally understand the idea that, because we've obviously been talking a lot about Finlay Curtis, and Finlay Curtis has been very, very exciting, especially with his goals, in pre-season, and he's looked, the part. And there's nothing we want more than a Rangers supporter to come through the academy and be, the star of the Rangers team, Barry Ferguson. Simple, he's the prototype of the Rangers man to come through the academy. But if you look at players like Ross McCausland, who's now 22 and just not made the grade, and he's everything. He ticks every single box Rangers supporters want in a Rangers player, apart from the fact he's not as good at football as we need him to be, and that's extremely unfortunate. But we need to be open to every single option that we have to make the team better. And in this instance, the one we're talking about, the loan of Mikey Moore, I think makes us a better team.
Absolutely. Billy, on the points, Ross has sort of touched on, I think, a number of points within this discussion where there's, I think, there's looking at it from the youth development point of view, and there's looking at it from like the first team point of view. Obviously, the first team's priority above all else is to win, whereas obviously in youth development, the idea is to develop players as best you can. And this was a point that came up in that earlier in the chat that I mentioned as well, where I talked about like the same point that Ross did, where we're bringing in a player who's ultimately better than the players behind him if you're looking at the youth group. And ultimately it's the youth group are there to obviously be developed by the club, but ultimately they need to be good enough to play for the first team and meet that criteria, which is to win. Because if they don't, then they're not going to get in. So to me, there was one person in particular who felt that bringing in someone like Moore is taking a position away from a youth player, and I sort of argued back to that, saying, well, you can have an infinite number of squad players. The only restriction is who gets registered on the day for the game. So it's not a position's being taken away. And ultimately, if a youth player ends up being good enough, then they'll get started ahead of Moore or anyone else that comes in. And I think Ross made a really good example there with Barry Ferguson. He's a player that came in. We had, plenty of decent players around at the time. And indeed in sort of some of the years ahead when he came in. But ultimately, Barry Ferguson was good enough. He was the player that came through who was good enough to A, get into the team, but then B, also become a stalwart of said team. What's your thoughts in terms of this idea of this potential juxtaposition between the goals of the first team and the youth development, and where these kind of loans come in? Is it something that's only really a point because of his age, or should these arguments apply to all loan players? Because you could take the argument that we shouldn't be loaning anyone because we should be developing youth players. But again, that doesn't necessarily fit with the goal of the first team, which is to win.
Well, first up, I think he's 18 in like a fortnight. So if he was 18, I suspect we'd be having a wee bit less of this sort of chat, because everyone seemed to think he was 18 last week, and it's only since it came out that he's 17 that, is that the best we can do? I think there's a slight flaw in the argument now for people thinking that players like Mickey Moore are blocking progress for Rangers youth team players. And the sad reality is that players of the calibre of Mikey Moore or Billy Gilmore, or possibly even a modern day Barry Ferguson, will probably be hoovered up by English teams way before they ever become like an almost first teamer. The kind of apparatus that they have in England, the kind of money that the likes of Chelsea have, you saw it with Billy Gilmore. These guys are getting offers of contracts before they've ever really kicked the ball in anger, that effectively are setting their families up for life. And it's very difficult. You have to be very forward thinking or very resolute to turn that down and say, now I'll hang about at Rangers at the age of 15, I'll stay here another 2 or 3 years and see how things pan out. So I think the reason we're getting the chance, hopefully, at Mikey Moore is because he's gone to a big club in the richest league in the world, and now he's at a stage where he needs a year of maybe competitive football, getting toughened up a bit. The reality is, if he'd been in the Rangers Youth Academy, he'd have been hoovered up years ago. Someone, that sort of generational talent that Mitch was talking about, they're just not going to stay in Scotland, sadly. So I have a degree of sympathy with the Rangers youth apparatus, because, you're getting the likes of Finlay Curtis. These are not the top level guys. These are the guys that would be 2 or 3 levels down, that hopefully with a bit more TLC and a bit more input, we can turn into good players. But it'd be fascinating to me to see what would happen if like Barry Ferguson, who, by the way, I don't, it's going to sound maybe a bit controversial, I don't think of him as a product of our youth academy. I think of him as a freak, because if we had a youth academy that had a history of producing players of the quality of Barry Ferguson, maybe. But I think when you're actually looking at like one guy who you could really class as being, like Virgin and world class at his best, that doesn't say an awful lot about what we produce. And I think there's just a reality about like being in Scotland. It's like, if you even look at beyond the youth team into the first team, Celtic have had a free run at it for like a number of years. And in that period of time, they had like the likes of Virgil van Dijk come in. Virgil van Dijk clearly was going to be one of the best defenders in the world if he carried on progressing, but Celtic couldn't sell him to a top 5 club because he's coming from Scotland. There's only so much polishing up you can do in Scotland. So Van Dijk had to go to Southampton first. Similar with Frimpong. Frimpong was never going from Celtic to Liverpool, because you can only prove yourself to a certain level in Scotland. A bit more when you go into Europe, yes, but you can only do so much in Scotland. And I think that's reflected in the first team and in the youth team setup. So I've got a degree of sympathy with the youth team players coming through. I think if we can get someone of the calibre of Mikey Moore for a season, I think we go for it. I have reservations, because I do think players, super talented players who come to toughen up in Scotland for a year, I don't think go full bore while they're here. I think Diallo did fine. I think Tillman started very well and then tailed off. But I think what you saw were youth players who come up and went, right, I've got what I need out of it. And I kind of felt both of them played within themselves latterly at their time here. So it is what it is. I think anyone that doesn't want Mikey Moore in the squad, tell me who is going to be better that we can get.
Absolutely, good point. Let's see there. Swinging around to yourself, Mitch. We one of the things that's become increasingly common in loans dealings are loans with options or obligations to buy. And our own Bald Russell Martin here says, I think all loans we should put in an option to buy. So we've already touched on, obviously, the fact that that's not necessarily practical overall, because you're going to have some players that come in, like, say, a Mikey Moore, who there's just no prospect of us buying him. But do you think that that is something that we will continue to leverage on, say, the majority of loans, and also that we should be leveraging on a lot of these loans in terms of that kind of financial jiggery pokery?
No. And the short answer to that is no. I think there's got to be an element of practicality behind it. Of if a player, and I'll using this window as a really good example, is Max Aarons, who we touched on earlier on, where you go, this is essentially his audition season for us, where you go, if this goes well, you would assume, maybe not necessarily in the contract, but there's maybe a gentleman's agreement with Bournemouth of, if Max comes here and does well, the figure to take him next summer would be X. That doesn't necessarily need to be written into a contract for me, as long as there's some sort of gentleman's agreement between the two clubs. But equally, there are players like Tierney, for example, where I would have liked to have seen that option maybe have been an obligation, but that's easy to say in hindsight. I think this is the issue when it comes to having a player on loan, and it's not just an issue typified in loan signings, it's an issue with any signing. You don't know how a player's going to react or adapt to the league until they're here. And I think having some I think it's nice, the idea of an option or obligations, in contracts. The theory behind it's nice, but I think there's working ways around that of the two chairmen of the two clubs having a sensible conversation to say, right, if this goes well, price is X. We will not stiff you. However, much like in the Tierney case, you go, the option for you to get that player at that price will expire on this date. And if the player isn't purchased on that date for that agreed amount from you, it's open season at that point. And you're price matching whoever else comes in for the player. I think that works well for the player. It works well for both clubs, because sometimes, let's be honest, and again, using Mikey Moore as an example, he is a player that realistically, even at 17, as a player we would probably not be able to afford, just given how the English system works. He's probably on taking a punt at English wages anywhere between 15 to 25 grand a week at 17, 18. Realistically, we are not in that cash richer position to be given a 17-year-old or a soon to be 18-year-old £15,000 a week. That is genuinely just not going to happen. However, what it does potentially do is, with these other clubs that we're maybe getting loan players from, the likes of Wolves, the likes of Spurs, the likes of Bournemouth, it creates a working relationship towards maybe looking at senior players that are maybe not quite Premier League ready, but maybe ready to go to, instead of going to a top-end championship team or a bottom-end Premiership team, they come to us for a season as a proving ground. And it could be that the player says, you know what, actually, while I'm here, I love it here, and I don't actually want to go back to my parent club. If we've got a healthy relationship with that team, it makes those conversations a lot bit better, and it maybe stops us from getting our trousers pulled down in that English market or in some of the top five league markets. I think this goes back to, and it's maybe I'm probably getting really deep at this point now, of when the 49ers took over, they mentioned about wanting to rebuild relationships, not just necessarily, I don't think this means just in Scotland, but I think it means building relationships across Europe with other clubs and obviously beyond that as well. And I think loans like the Mikey Moore one, the Max Aarons ones, the ones for Jigger, for example, these, and obviously with Tierney at Wolfsburg last season, these are things that go a long way to giving us a reputation within that top 5 Euro leagues at the moment. And if we have that relationship, the chances are you go from being the club that teams want to send youngsters to or send outcasts of the team to being the club that if a player in that team hears that Rangers are interested, they suddenly go, do you know what, my exit strategy looks a lot cleaner at this point. And the selling club will get what they want, we get what we want, and potentially that's a saleable asset in 24 months' time.
Yeah, interesting points there. I think I'm going to open this up to the other guys as well. I was going to come to you anyway, Ross, so handily there. Put what I was going to put to you, and obviously add in whatever you were wanting to say as well. Mitch has touched on, sort of gentlemen's agreements there, and that we don't necessarily need to have these obligations in all the time. Looking at it from the other side, you could be cynical to say that maybe is that potentially naive? If you say are the club that owns Václav Černý, who wasn't necessarily in a great place 12 months ago, but then has been put out on loan, done fantastically well both domestically and in Europe, and suddenly has an inflated price tag that you can add on. Even if you've made a gentleman's agreement, are you not potentially likely to then go, well, okay, fair enough, 12 months ago I would have been happy with 5 million, but now I want 8? Is that something that we really should be looking to get in contracts written down?
A lot of clubs won't agree to that, to be honest with you, and I hope my sound's a little bit better now. I have removed my
Thank you, we're not listening to Heart FM anymore.
There was absolutely nothing happening there. I'm surprised you can actually hear my heartbeat. I'm surprised I've got a heart, to be honest with you. My missus has said a few times I don't have one. So anyway, to move on, the one thing before we got into that, I wanted to just kind of emphasize a point that Mitch was talking about building relationships. I don't think you can emphasize enough how important Europe is. Europe is infinitely better than anything else that we can offer any footballer. And that's not a new thing. How many times did we sign players in the mid-2000s and the first thing was, I want to play in the Champions League? Because in the late 2000s to the early 2010s, we had instant access, ourselves and Celtic, basically the winners of the league, had instant access to the Champions League. And that was our selling point, was that you come up here, and yeah, it's not going to be the greatest football all the time, but you're going to play in the biggest derby in the world, arguably, and you're going to play the Champions League. You qualify for the Champions League and you'll get bonuses, out the backside. It's so important. And now, us being a reputable club in Europe, understandably, we're not at the level of the Champions League yet, but we're a team in the Europa League that, we've got such a great reputation. We've built it. It's not been given. It's taken years of, real disappointment. Progress in the Curran was an absolute disaster, and we were at the absolute lowest of low. Looking at it now, we're a team that even other teams don't want to draw in Europe, and because we're a force, Ibrox is an experience that players want to come and experience as footballers. And if you can sell that to teams, then it can only set them on. And just obviously to kind of emphasise the point you were making there, Mikey Moore. Let's just use him as an example because he's been linked. Is Mikey Moore going to learn more playing for, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, is he going to learn more playing for Huddersfield or Burnley than he is playing 8 games in the Europa League and the Old Firm Derby? Is he going to learn more? Come on, let's be honest about it, and it's not being disrespectful, it's just a fact, is that the Old Firm in Europe is infinitely more important and bigger in footballing terms than anything that he would experience playing in the lower end of the Premier League or the the Championship. And that kind of takes me on to my point that you obviously asked. You're talking about, is it more important to have these agreements in place that players then need to stay? We've been kind of stung with that players will turn up and be that good in those competitions that they don't want to stay. We've seen it with Malik Tillman, and I can't emphasise this enough. I know people were talking about it in the chat that we get stung. Malik Tillman didn't want to be here. He didn't want to play St Johnstone 4 times a season, or Livingston, or Dundee. He didn't want it. We could have offered, regardless, stupid amounts of money. There was a deal in place. He did not want to stay, and they're human beings. If you don't want to be somewhere, you're not going to be there. End of story. Czerny's maybe slightly different, but he's obviously played his way into Wolfsburg plans to the point that they feel they can get a better deal. And
let's be honest, we don't like it because we've continuously spent this summer, complaining about how Lille are trying to lowball us and we're trying to get as much money out of Lille as possible. We can't then be frustrated that Wolfsburg are trying to get as much money as they can for Vasacherny, for instance, So, like I say, it's a totally two-edged sword, but we as football fans, we're total hypocrites. We want to get players for the least amount of money as possible, and we want to get the most amount of money as possible for our assets.
Absolutely. I think we can be frustrated. We just have to understand, like you say, we play by the same rules. I think John in the chat also sort of brought up the Tillman deal and Bayern. That's what Bayern done to us, and we had a contract in place. I think it's important to note, however, like Ross said there, like Tillman, I'm splitting hairs here, but Tillman didn't want to play in Scotland. I think he'd have happily played for Rangers, but he didn't want to play in Scotland. And like you say, there's nothing that we could offer him that would have changed his mind. But to John's point, because we had that deal in place, is why we ended up getting a kickback from Bayern, because Bayern wanted to move him on, but our deal prevented them from doing that until a certain point, until the contractual period of our deal was up, because we had first. We had the first option to take him, and they basically paid us to get out of that so that they could move him on, because they had options that were ultimately better for them, and as far as Malik was concerned, better for him. So it was because we had that in written place that we were able to benefit, because otherwise, if we didn't have that in place, we'd have just gone and they'd have just moved him forward, and that would have been the end of it. So, as I say, for me, I do think there's benefit to that. Okay, so what it moves on to now then with yourself, Billy, is starting to look at the sort of the broader scale. So I've got here a slide of loan players over the past sort of decade. So for those tuning in at home, as I say, we've got it's sort of just year by year players that we've brought in on loan as per transfer market. And so forgive me if there's maybe anyone missing. I did originally have Hindman and Bates from 2016-17 missing, because for some reason they weren't noted. But this should hopefully be the vast majority. Billy, as I say, I'll come to yourself first. Looking at this sort of from this more macro level, 2014 to now, I think it's fair to say, when we touched on it beforehand, there's a spectrum of quality across this group. There's a spectrum of circumstances as to why some of these players were brought in, and of course then a spectrum of how well they've done. When you look at that, what I'm going to ask this of everyone, what are the kind of what's if you were to pick one name that kind of stands out from that list, good or bad, who is it that stands out to you, and why?
I'll get my bad one out the road first, just because it's been like, since you brought the subject up, it's like Aaron Ramsey. As soon as we went in for him, I just had a bad feeling. Nothing about it to me felt encouraging. When you looked at his recent history, you looked at how keen Juventus were to get rid of him. Yep, the guy can do things. He can turn up and be a decent player. But a guy playing at Juventus at his level coming to Scotland was a bit of a red flag. And the fear was all he wanted to do was get fit for Wales, like a la Gareth Bale. And okay, anybody can be unlucky with a penalty, but it's a really crap penalty. Even now, it's a final FFS. So not going there. But yeah, Aaron Ramsey definitely didn't want him, had a bad feeling about it. And watching the final with my brother in the living room in Bellsill when he did that, it was great, I knew it. So trying to think, go to my happy place. I would say it's funny, we've had a lot of decent loan signings. We've had a lot of really flaky ones as well, but a lot of decent loan signings. I would say the way I was trying to look at it is that the player I would have liked us to hold on to had we had the money, or had we got into the Champions League, which I think would have actually possibly sealed it as well, was Sima. I really liked Sima. I liked how he developed when he came in. I liked what he offered, you know, power, pace, skill, that cracking goal he scored. You know, he did things in Scottish football that made you think, oh, he is higher level and he can do things that other players in Scotland can't do. Like that goal where he took the ball on his chest in the 18-yard box and then just volleyed it home. And you kind of had to kind of watch the replay to see what had happened there. I think he seemed to. He also everything I'd heard about Seema coming in from when he'd been in Denmark is he was actually he's a really good character. He'd arrived, I think, in Denmark during the pandemic and basically arrived, and then they're in lockdown, and he's stuck living like in accommodation in a farm out in the middle of nowhere in rural Denmark. And basically, his attitude was, right, what do you need me to do? I'm not doing anything else. I'll help out around the farm. And I think you saw that when he came to Rangers. Wee bit bumpy to begin with, then started producing goals, producing performances, got that injury, which was a big disappointment. But to be honest, I wish we'd been able to hold on to him. And I think if we'd made the Champions League, he might have been inclined to stay. He had nothing, a little bit like Tillman, he had nothing but good things to say about Rangers, but I got the impression that he felt quite at home after bouncing about. So, yeah, for me, Tillman on the basis that I wish we still had him. I gather we're not likely to get him now. I've heard they might be going to Norwich, which I don't know if that deal's done yet, and I don't know what Russell Martin thinks, but that's a surprise because, like, to me, he's better than that, and I would happily still have Malik Tillman and wish to God we'd never seen Aaron Ramsey. That's my answer.
Tillman or Seema, because you've switched names halfway through there.
Oh, sorry. No, Seema definitely. Tillman I liked, but Tillman like started off like a house on fire, and we remember the sort of the memes about the header where it looked like he basically entered low Earth orbit, and he again physically could do things that no one else in Scottish football could do. But I think like what Ross was saying was accurate. I think he got to a point where he didn't want to be in Scotland. I think he'd got the benefit of what he could get from being at Rangers, and he, fair enough, you haven't grown up in Scotland. The idea of playing St Mirren between 4 and 6 times a season is not that exciting. So, sorry, if I said Tillman, I mean, Freudian slip. Tillman was a decent player, and if he'd wanted to stay, wouldn't have been the worst. But definitely in terms of the player I would have liked us to hold on to based on what we saw across a loan season, it would have definitely been Seema for me.
I think we're looking at what Seema, I've done it myself there, Tillman has gone on to do. It's I think it's about 50-60 million he's going for now. So I think that speaks volumes for that. Mitch, what about yourself? What's your kind of thoughts when you're looking across the sort of the types of names that are going along there?
We've had the good, the bad, and the gorgeous in there, is the best way I can put it. I'm looking at players like Zuniga, for example. It's a player that I never ever want to see play football again in my life. Absolutely housing footballer. And then I think in terms of the successes, I'm genuinely torn between probably Kent and Seema. It's hard to see past Seema. I think Tillman, we got a very special but very raw young player who, when he came here, just needed to play adult football. Much like when we talk about wanting to send our own youngsters out on loan, we want to send them away on loan, away for the spotlight of Scotland or away for the top flight in Scotland. So whether that be the Championship or whether that be down to League One in England, we want to send them away to the spotlight. I think that's very much what Bayern did when they sent him across here, because they went, it's a non-top 5 league, but you're also playing for a team that you're probably going to get in the team. So I think for me, I'm going to have to nudge it and say Kent, not to be controversial, but I think his long-term impact post-loan justifies me saying that he would probably be my most successful loan player from it, because he had, and it is purely down to that knock-on impact post-loan. If I was to be so bold as to give you a prediction, I think Cortez overtakes that quite easily within the next 18 to 24 months. If he can get back to
that's a bold prediction.
That's a stunner.
Mark that one, folks, in the comments. We're going
All
to clip
I'm gonna
that for
say-
later, definitely.
Wherever Dave is, where he's watching, I told Dave at the start of last season that, you know, that young Raskin was on the way to turn himself quite comfortably into a £10 million player. I think I've more than been proven right there.
That's true. That's true. We've got some previous form there. So everyone that has to say bold. You've heard it here first. Mitch's next Oracle prediction is that Cortez will outdo Kent. Will that happen? Let's see. Ross, what about yourself?
I think the lack of Zungu propaganda is disgraceful. He was an unbeaten champion. Come on, nothing better than that. No, to be honest with you, I think the obvious answer is Jermaine Defoe. I genuinely can't see anybody in that list that's better than Jermaine Defoe. Genuinely, in terms of a guy that even past it shows you how good he was, that even when he was past his best, still turned up here and scored goals. And the way that he bought into what we want Rangers players to be as an ambassador and as a footballer on the park, you couldn't have asked for any more. When he turned up, you obviously go, oh, amazing, Jermaine Defoe. Imagine we got him 5 years earlier. It didn't really matter because what we got was still magic. He was a goal scorer. He was a sensational footballer. And it's probably, one of, we've obviously had the Gerrard debate to the cows come home, and I'm fed up with it, to be honest with you. But we don't get Jermaine Defoe without Steven Gerrard, so you have to give him props for it. But in the winter window, when Jermaine Defoe and Stephen Davis, two Premier League quality footballers, turn up at Ibrox, that's one of the biggest catalysts for us starting to rebuild our reputation. It's not even close, in my opinion. There's some good players within that list, one way or another. I thought Jamie Murphy was a good footballer, hampered by injury. We've talked about Mo Diamande. He could be good if he gets more consistent. I think genuinely in the right hand side of that list is, barring Defoe and Davis, and you can say Mitch has argued the Kent point, and you can make that argument. Koulibaly's hampered by injury, but apart from that list is really, really depressing. We've had a really bad time of it over the whole case. You've got the Newcastle 5 at the bottom there from a really, really dark time. Although Vucic was all right, but bearing in mind that we were getting beat after Raith Rovers every other week, and he was scoring every goal in a 2-1 defeat. But apart from that, I don't think we would. Our ventures into the loan market have been remotely good enough for what you want it to be. So I understand when you have the scepticism over bringing players in on loan. I understand that, because it's been unfortunate that the players we've brought in either haven't been good enough, a la most of them, or they've been too good to the point that we can't afford them.
Absolutely. I think Defoe's a great point as well. He's arguably scored the best goal I've ever seen. In that goal against, was it Livingston? I always forget the team. For that ball, classic sort of Tav ball over the top, and whereas most, like say Dessers against United, takes the touch and then scores, Defoe just somehow magically. I didn't even see what was going on, and the ball was in the net. I was like, what? And you watch the replays, it's just absolutely unbelievable. What a goal! I'm assuming this is in reference to Mitch's prediction based on, out of curiosity, just the voices in his mind, Bo. It's just the voices in his mind.
It's okay. I've answered that one in the comments, Doug.
Pause in the chat. Was Davy Weir not a loan to start with? Yes, he was. It was an initial 6 months loan. We brought Davy Weir in on after Everton. I think they actually released him from his contract, and we took him in temporarily, and then obviously Davy Weir showed us that he was the indestructible footballer that he was.
I thought he was just a Bosman, basically paid after the rest of his contract and let him come.
It might have just been a 6 month contract. Then we took him in temporarily to start with, and then, as I say, he became the indestructible, or displayed himself to be the indestructible man that he was, and so he ended up staying for what felt like forever. Much to our benefit. So the other thing I wanted to touch on just before we finish is the other side of this. KW a little earlier sort of put the comment here. Rangers don't really sell our players after loan spells. I hope that changes. And that's the kind of the other side of the coin that we've not really touched on this so far in this discussion. We've talked a lot about obviously loans coming in for us, but obviously the other side of that loan coin is us loaning players out to other teams. And this is something that I think we've not done well enough for some of our youth players. For example, and again, maybe this is just looking back in hindsight, but players like Leon King, he came in, he went into an awful situation, I think did reasonably well given the circumstances and the fact that he was like 17, 18 at the time, not playing with necessarily the best players available due to other injuries we had and having to do it at the highest level possible. And then just well, in fact, overall since then has basically never played. He's appeared sporadically now and again. To me, that's someone that was ripe for going out on loan and going, right, you got this bit of experience here, not the best, but you've done well. Let's pop you out and build on that, because we're not gonna be playing you here. Billy, do you think that is something we need to work on and build more? I think it should be something that's built much more formally into the sort of pathway for players, is giving them loan opportunities, and not any loan opportunities, but ones that will provide them with quality. We've seen in the past with players like I think one of the best examples is Alan McGregor, who went to Dunfermline, became a first team player, was winning player of the month, was winning awards with Dunfermline, and then came back, and obviously once he got his way into the team, had the career he had. Let's hope Mason Munn can replicate that. But do you think that's something that should be more fundamental to our youth development programme, especially given the lack of football they play generally?
Well, I mean, the lack of football is a thing I go back to a lot. But young players now do not play enough football, full stop. They just don't. That's why we don't produce the players. One of the reasons we don't produce the players we had in the 80s is they're not playing for 3 teams. They're not playing hours and hours a week. But I think it comes back again to the levels thing. We can, as I understand it, Rangers certainly have or now have individual plans for each and every player. For each and every youth player, they have a plan. I think the problem is it's levels again. I think we no longer get to hold on to players who are going to develop. Like you take McGregor. Well, we've had McCrory go out on loan. We're putting Mason Munn out on loan. And is it simply the case that Alan McGregor's levels above what they were? He's just a better player, and if they were better players, they wouldn't be at Rangers. That's my question, because you can take a good youth prospect, put them into like a Premiership team, get them some experience, and you want to see them develop. And time and again, we put players out on loan and they just don't develop, which makes me wonder if they're not kicking on predominantly because they're not the level of players we used to have. And they'll find a level, but you should think you're going as a Rangers player to another team, and not that you swagger in and have an attitude, but you should be going in there with a quiet determination to go, I need to show that I'm actually coming from like the best squad in the country. I should be levels above, not in an arrogant way, but you should be standing out. And time again, for years now, we haven't seen it. And again, McGregor's almost like the kind of standout. The one for me that was a bit disappointing was Alex Lowry, and I think he was dreadfully unlucky. I think you hear stories about attitude, and I don't know if that's true or not, but he was one unlucky player, because that absolute horror challenge that he underwent from a player called Love, of all things, that didn't, I don't think he even got a yellow card, never mind a red for it. And so he was shown like has been way too good for the team he was in. And then he lost his mum, which obviously at that age is tragic and a massive thing for any young person to deal with. So he's the only person that I've really seen come through in the last couple of years and been kind of disappointed that he didn't kick on. In general, we're putting players out and it's like, let's see if they can get a bit of experience. There's not really been that many to quicken the pulse in terms of like youth players that we're putting out to other teams. And again, I just wonder if it's we those players at a certain level, 12, 13, 14, 15, are getting hoovered up by richer clubs. So when it comes to putting out what we've got in our youth squad, they're not likely to make quantum leaps because they're not here. That's what I wonder.
Yep, that's a fair point there. We're definitely losing the best players. I think you've got the obvious example of his name's totally wiped in mind. He plays for Napoli now.
Billy Gilmore.
Thank you very much. His name totally just. I was trying to going, I'll bring up Billy Gilmore, and then just disappeared. Billy Gilmore, yes, a perfect example of a player with immense talent that obviously was quick out the door to financial pastures new. Okay, so we've come up to the hour mark there. So I think that as I say, takes us to the end. I'll finish with the opportunity.
Just following what Billy was saying.
It depends. Can you make a quick quote unquote point?
I can have it wrapped up within 90 seconds.
Right, on you go.
I think as a club, we've let ourselves down previously under the old ownership. Not the new ownership was not having a partner club like we've now got with Wraith Rovers going into next year, going into this season. That we've now got essentially a kind of a co-partnership with them. That we will send Wraith Rovers X number of youngsters this year. I think that's good for both Wraith and obviously ourselves now. And I think now we're seeing more and more because obviously the Lowland League and the B teams not getting in Lowland leagues, and that's all a separate issue. We're probably now seeing more and more of the top flight making agreements like that with either Championship or League One Scottish level clubs to send the youngsters to. And I think longer term we're going to see the benefit of that.
Cool. Succinctly put. Well done there, Mitch. As I say, we'll come to the close there. Thanks everyone for tuning in to this evening's discussion. A lot of good points made, I think. A lot of good and bad players touched upon as well. Obviously we've got the big game coming up against Panathinaikos on tomorrow night. We will have both post and pre-match pods for that, so do tune into those. The pre-match will be at 6 o'clock. Post-match, all being well and there being no extra time or anything like that, will be around about 9, so do join us for those. I'll just leave it to say thank you to as I say, everyone in the chat for joining in. A lot of good points being made there on the topic. I think does have a lot of opinions to it. I'll just quickly swing around the guys to say thank you, and your ending question: if we could bring in one more lone player, which position would you want it to cover? Ross.
Left back.
Left back. Okay, thanks for your contributions this evening, and enjoy the game tomorrow. And Billy?
I was thinking left back or maybe right wing, but yeah, I'd say left back. And let us never forget, this was the night that Mitch predicted Oscar Cortez is going to be a world superstar in 12 to 24 months. Bookmark it.
It could go down. It could go down in history. And finally, yourself, Mitch.
It's not a position, but a player I would like to see back on loan. I'd like to see Casemiro back.
Casemiro, yeah, I thought he was a great looking player.
I think there's a wee bit of unfinished business there.
Could be a bit interesting one. I'm interested to actually check him out over the next sort of 12, 18 months and see how he does, particularly injury wise. As I say, I did think he looked a really good player. So yeah, I'll just mirror you with that for my choice as well. So thanks everyone for tuning in. It's been another great conversation. Thanks to the lads. Thanks to everyone in the chat. My name's Doug. I'll be your host for this evening. This has been the Rangers Journal. Do remember that every night is a Rangers Journal night.